Yo soy un hombre sincero, de donde crece la palma. Y antes de morirme quiero echar mis versos del alma. Yo vengo de todas partes, y hacia todas partes voy. Arte soy entre las artes, y en los montes, montes soy.
As one of the 19th century's most provocative writers, José Martí helped define the notion of being free. As one of the century's fiercest revolutionaries, he etched this noble principle in the hearts and minds of his Cuban compatriots, and he did this mostly from exile. It was from exile that Martí would struggle his entire life to liberate his native soil from Spanish colonialism. And though he did not live to see the end result, his writings, teachings, and his political activism stand as proud testaments to his quest for freedom.
Yo creo que quién es José Martí, eso realmente ya a estas alturas de la inflamación martiana no vamos a poder decirlo nunca. Yo creo que en qué hemos convertido Martí, en qué se ha convertido Martí, puede ser incluso una visión tan individual como el propio Martí. Cada cual tiene su propio Martí, ha decodificado e interpretado a Martí de acuerdo a sus propias necesidades o a su cosmovisión, ¿no? Particularmente yo no puedo decirte esto es Martí, aquello es Martí, lo otro es Martí. Yo creo que pasa como esos buenos trajes estándar, ¿no? Que a todo el mundo le sirve. Y yo me interesaría mucho más saber qué quiso ser realmente Martí.
Pues yo creo que Martí proyectaba una especie de autoridad moral muy notable. Que un hombre tan joven fuera llamado desde los 30 y tantos años maestro por quienes lo rodeaban, y ya es algo que demuestra que tenía que tener unos rasgos muy curiosos de personalidad. Era un hombre muy severo, muy solemne, probablemente de trato afable, pero al mismo tiempo seguramente con cierta distancia.
One looks at historically that Eastern Cuba has been the kind of the redemptive place of Cubanidad, of Cubanía, and yet we have the most forceful articulate of Cuban nationalism, someone who is first generation Cuban, parents were peninsulares, habanero, who spent the better part of his adult life outside of Cuba. And it is this person who now becomes the most forceful exponent of what is the most exalted notion of nation.
The story of Cuba's most important exile begins in the middle of the 1800s, when the idea of Cuban independence existed only in the nationalist writings of Cubans such as Gertrudis Gómez de Avellaneda and Father Félix Varela.
Martí picks up on the philosophy of Varela, the humanistic philosophy of Varela, but channels it into an effective political action. That was the grandeur of Martí, was putting philosophy to work. The philosophy of Varela, the philosophy of Mendive, Luis Caballero, channeling it into an effective political course.
The main concern the Spanish government had in relation to Cuba was the fear of annexation, as the U.S. southern states promoted the purchase of Cuba as a way to strengthen the industry of slavery. On January 28, 1853, José Julián Martí Pérez was born in a humble Havana residence. The firstborn to Spaniards Mariano Martí and Leonor Pérez, the young José would soon begin to develop a Cuban nationalist identity. Under the tutelage of schoolmaster Rafael María de Mendive, Martí began developing theories that promoted self-rule for Cuba.
Lo que se demuestra con esa secuencia de Varela, Mendive, Martí, es la importancia de la pedagogía en la formación del carácter. Mendive es un producto de Varela. Martí es un producto de Mendive. Uno no se explica a Martí sin Mendive. El padre de Martí es un hombre de muy escasa formación, la madre de Martí nula formación, el padre de Martí es un hombre brutal, un hombre que incluso lo maltrata físicamente. Sin embargo, él es un espíritu distinto, enamorado de la tolerancia, un espíritu además romántico, con un sentido de la responsabilidad. Todo eso es la herencia de Mendive.
In 1868, Cuba's first armed revolt ignited in the eastern province of Oriente, as Cuban landowner Carlos Manuel de Céspedes declared war. Inspired by the cry for liberty, a teenage José Martí penned several essays displaying his support for the cause of independence. In a dramatic poem titled Abdallah, Martí revealed the conflicts with his loyalist parents, who were appalled by their son's anti-Spanish attitudes. In one scene, a young warrior explains to his mother the passion he feels for his homeland.
Love, mother, for the patria is not the foolish love of the soil or the grass where our feet walk. It is the invincible hatred for those who oppress her, and the eternal hostility towards those who attack her.
Tensions mounted in the Cuban capital as the insurgency intensified. 16-year-old José Martí and his friend Fermín Valdés Domínguez were arrested in January of 1869 on charges of co-authoring a letter chastising a mutual friend for supporting the colonial rule. Martí was sentenced to 6 years of hard labor in the rock quarry of San Lázaro in Havana. In a letter to his mother, he wrote,
I am sorry to be behind bars, but my imprisonment is very useful to me. It has given me plenty of lessons for my life, which I foresee will be short. I am now 16 years old, but many old men have told me that I am like an old man.
After his father intervened with the authorities, the young Cuban was moved to a prison on the Isle of Pines and was eventually deported to Spain in 1871. Upon arriving in Spain, Martí authored a pamphlet titled Political Prison in Cuba. The piece was directed at Spaniards in an effort to alert them of their government's tyrannical tactics.
Infinite Pain should be the title. Infinite Pain should be the only title on these pages. Infinite Pain. For the pain of imprisonment is the harshest, most devastating pain, murdering the mind, searing the soul, and leaving marks that will never be erased.
Martí read the Bible a great deal during that period, and the Pericidio was very much influenced by the style of the Bible. It's a work which is comparable to Dante's works in the sense that it portrays all of the horror of the Spanish prison system, all of the horror of the Spanish colonial regime. It's a work which is written with a great deal of pathos, a work which shows one of the earliest works, perhaps, which shows Martí's, which represents Martí's decision to devote himself to emancipating Cuba, to doing away with the colonial regime.
After attaining a law degree from the University of Saragossa, Martí visited France, where a mutual friend organized a meeting with the famed writer Victor Hugo. In January 1875, Martí arrived in Mexico, where he reunited with his family. Upon arrival, his father, Don Mariano, informed him of his sister Anna's death. That death marked the first of what would be many personal losses for Martí.
Ella nació con flores en la frente. Ella brotaba luz de su cabeza. Y en sus brazos dormían blandamente la Virgen sin color de pureza.
Martí took a job as a teacher and befriended the Mexican political activist Manuel Mercado. Through his contacts, Mercado found Martí work as a writer in one of Mexico's most prominent journals, La Revista Universal. There, Martí chronicled the political landscape of the Mexican capital. As his writing career began, so too did his relationship with Carmen Zayas Bazán. Soon he would propose marriage, but it was a marriage that was instantly marked by separation. In November of 1876, an insurrection led by General Porfirio Díaz toppled the government of Lerdo de Tejada, whom Martí had supported in his writings. The inhospitable political climate forced the young Cuban to flee to Guatemala alone. In the Central American country, Martí met María García Granados, the teenage daughter of a former Guatemalan president. Though Martí maintained the relationship was fraternal, Granados' sudden, inexplicable death after learning of Martí's matrimony clearly left an indelible imprint on the poet's soul.
Ella dio al desmemoriado una almohadilla dolor. Él volvió casado. Ella se murió de amor.
In 1878, the 10-year armed struggle in Cuba was halted as the Mambises, the rebel forces, found themselves numerically, strategically, and psychologically defeated.
You're talking about a war that opened in the height of slavery, and the idea that social unrest would expand into the rich sugar-producing areas of the western part of the island, necessarily, almost by necessity, by fiat, requires that the planta class align itself with Spanish colonialism as a means of defending their interest in property. And so there is this is the external aspect, and then the internal aspect of the debates within the separatist movement that have to do with strategies and tactics and ideologies and programs and the degree to which they could form a consensus as to what the purpose of Cuban arms was about.
During the 10 Years' War, Gómez and Maceo emerged as important combatants, as military leaders. Of course, the war ended in defeat in 1878, and their analysis was that the war was lost because of dissension and disunity in revolutionary ranks. They did believe that the war could have been won, but that there hadn't been enough dedication to a united military effort against the Spanish. When the war began, the insurgents actually created a republic in arms, a republic which included a presidency and included an assembly or a parliament. And this immediately began to create problems because they debated all kinds of issues which in the end Maceo and Gómez felt was detrimental to unity and to the carrying out of the campaign.
The signing of the Treaty of San Juan seemed to dim the hopes of Cuban nationalists. Yet in the malaise of surrender, Mambí General Antonio Maceo defiantly rejected the treaty and continued his fight. Though Maceo would eventually have to abandon the battlefield, his stance redefined the end of the conflict for many Cuban separatists, rekindling the flame of Cuban independence. The surrender pact became nothing more than a temporary ceasefire.
Lo importante es qué produjo, qué surgió de esa guerra, que no fue una victoria, como señalé ahí, pero no fue una derrota. El gobierno español ofreció paz y perdonar a todo el mundo, y entonces se celebró. Algunos se fueron al extranjero, pero lo más importante, o los 3 puntos esenciales que yo veo, es primero que el liderazgo que empieza la lucha, Aguilera, Vicente Aguilera, Carlos Manuel de Céspedes, son gente de dinero, son gente de la clase alta, de lo que pudiéramos llamar la élite cubana. Ahora, esa gente pierde la guerra. ¿En qué sentido? De que van muriendo, van siendo muertos, y entonces los que van tomando las riendas son la gente del pueblo, Máximo Gómez, Antonio Maceo, Quintín Banderas, del mero pueblo, lo cual le da a Martí una lección, una visión que tiene enseguida de que esa es la gente que puede liberar a Cuba, peleando otra vez con España. Y por eso también el término de los dilemas raciales y los negros en Cuba surgen de esa guerra, donde la mayor parte de los negros se unen a los cubanos, a pesar de que los cubanos, no nos olvidemos, los cubanos teníamos todavía la esclavitud allí, y a pesar de eso ellos se unieron. También puede dar como dato que es el comienzo o el fortalecimiento del nacionalismo. Los cubanos tenían poetas como Heredia, tenían música, pero era desorganizada. Lo que sí empieza a celebrar el cubano en las escuelas, en todas partes, en las victorias que se ganaron contra España, la bandera que estaba allí para pelear, etcétera, pero que hacen la idea de la nación mucho, mucho más fuerte. El último toque que no mencioné, la intervención de los Estados Unidos empieza a crecer. ¿Por qué? Porque la industria azucarera sufre con las leyes que pasa España y las intervenciones contra los cubanos. Y entonces que los norteamericanos empiezan a ganar poder económico en Cuba.
At the end of the 10 Years' War, the Spanish government under General Arsenio Martínez Campos granted a general amnesty to all Cubans who had been forced into exile. Upon pleas from his family, Martí reluctantly returned to Havana. Martí found work as a law clerk and almost immediately resumed his activism. During this time, he met Juan Gualberto Gómez, a French-educated, free black man who shared Martí's commitment to self-determination and liberty. Their friendship would prove to be one of the most beneficial alliances to the cause of Cuban independence, for Gómez would remain one of Martí's most trusted combatants on the island. On November 22, 1878, Carmen Zayas Bazán gave birth to Martí's only son, José Francisco Martí, or Pepito as he was affectionately called. Fatherhood only briefly stemmed Martí's efforts to propose and sharpen his separatist ideas. The imperial government was once again under siege as fighting broke out in Oriente. Curious about Martí, who was gaining popularity as an orator, General Ramón Blanco attended an event where Martí spoke. In disbelief after the Cubans' insubordinate speech, the general labeled Martí not just a crazy man, but a dangerous crazy man. José Martí was detained and again forced into exile.
El hombre que clama vale más que suplica. Los derechos se toman, no se piden. Se arrancan, no se mendigan.
I am deeply obliged to this country, where the friendless finds always a friend, and a kind hand is always found by those who look honestly for work. A good idea finds always here a suitable, soft, grateful ground. You must be intelligent, that is all. Give something useful.
In the spring of 1880, José Martí arrived in New York alone. A keen observer, Martí wrote prolifically on his experiences in the United States, from the treatment of the American Indian to his observations on boxing, Martí chronicled U.S. issues for various publications, including the New York Sun and several prominent Latin American journals, particularly the Argentinian newspaper La Nación.
He lived in the United States at a time that we call the Gilded Age, when there were robber barons, where there was political abuse, and he was aware of all of that. He was aware of the problems that faced immigrants, the problems following the Civil War and Reconstruction, the mistreatment of Indians in the United States. At the same time, he really found solace in U.S. literature and U.S. writers. He welcomed their embrace of a new literature for a new continent. He appreciated the chance to publish freely what he thought. And so I would think you could say that in one sense, his perspective on literature balanced his perspective on politics.
Bueno, Martí tiene dos sentimientos muy claros hacia Estados Unidos. Por una parte, el aprecio por el sistema, por el modelo político, por el ímpetu económico de la sociedad norteamericana. Eso está clarísimo en sus escritos. Respeta la democracia como un modelo que le parece muy interesante, pero al mismo tiempo teme lo que es el espasmo imperial de los Estados Unidos, que es muy fuerte en los últimos 20 años del siglo XIX.
Liberty, it is thine hour of arrival. The whole world pulling the triumphal chariot has brought thee to these shores. Here thou art like the poet's dream, as a great space spanning heaven and earth. One is responsible for any malady one knows of and does not remedy. It is a criminal idleness, a passive guilt that differs only in degree from the guilt of doing. For apostleship is a daily and constant doing. Tolerance in peacetime is as grand as heroism in war. The victors should not resent the tributes that are paid to the memory of the defeated side's virtues. Men charge at each other like bulls here. They gamble on the strength of their necks, bite and claw on the fight, and then go covered in blood, their teeth knocked out, their foreheads bruised, their knuckles raw, weaving and falling to collect the bag of money they have just won in the fight.
Martí had a profound engagement with United States literature. He was a kindred soul with Emerson. He wrote a marvelous essay about Emerson following the American Transcendentalist's death in 1882. And that essay included a number of quotes from Emerson's essay, Nature. Martí didn't always indicate them as quotes, but in fact, he conveyed a lot of Emerson's thinking to the Spanish Americans who read that. His interest in Emerson continued throughout the time he lived in the United States. He translated poetry by Emerson. He recorded comments about him in his notebooks. And we know that he found Emerson a great source of inspiration and a symbol of what was very good in the United States.
Emerson is dead, and sweet tears fill the eyes. The news brings envy, not pain. The breast fills not with anguish, but with tenderness. Death is a victory. When a person has lived well, the hearse is a triumphal chariot.
Martí has always been viewed by Cubans as a Cuban figure, a man who generated his ideas and thought about problems in terms of the Cuban reality. And of course that's true. But I think it's also important to recognize that Martí was a man who lived in the United States from 1880 to 1895, and that in living in the United States, he was influenced by the United States. He was influenced. So his ideas, we have to think about Martí, his ideas as also ideas that reflect his experience in the United States, and that his analysis of the Cuban problem, to some extent, would be influenced by many ideas developed as a result of issues in the United States, the race issue, for example, or workers' issues in the United States. These things, independent of Cuba's reality, I think would have been real important for Martí.
While in New York, Martí's marriage to Carmen Zayas Bazán crumbled. After several failed attempts to reignite the relationship, Zayas Bazán returned to Cuba with her son Pepito, never to see her husband again. The majority of the time José Martí lived in New York, he stayed at a guest house operated by Carmen Millares. In 1880, Millares gave birth to María Mantilla, who was rumored to be Martí's daughter. Martí developed a very close relationship with both Carmen Millares and María Mantilla. Gonzalo de Quesada literally grew up with Martí. They met when Martí arrived in New York. De Quesada was 12 years old. He would go on to graduate with a law degree from New York University and would come to be known as Martí's disciple, referring to him as maestro. While still at the university, De Quesada introduced Martí to a Jewish-American law student named Horatio Rubens. Rubens would eventually work closely with Martí as legal counsel to the Cuban Revolutionary Party. Considered to be the father of modernism, José Martí wrote with acute awareness and a lyrical style.
He started to write in new ways, much earlier than other Latin American writers, and wrote in a variety of different genres. Martí's works encompass prose, poetry, theater, children's stories. His letter writing was extraordinary and constitutes a separate genre in itself. He also cultivated the diary, especially at the very end of his life. So there's an enormous corpus of works that belong to Martí. And though in his lifetime he was known mostly for his prose, today we study him both for the importance of his prose and poetry.
Yo creo que el Martí dramaturgo tiene escasa importancia. El Martí novelista, que es muy poco lo que hace, como tiene también una importancia muy limitada. El Martí narrador para niños, bueno, pues tiene una importancia menor. Entonces hay dos facetas del Martí escritor que tienen mucho interés. La poesía y, a mi juicio, mucho más importancia, el periodismo. Periodismo oceánico, un periodismo a veces barroco, donde la frase se descoyunta y a veces no es tan claramente comprensible, pero finalmente es uno de los escritores con los que hay que contar en lengua castellana.
Martí podrá o no impresionarte como poeta. Yo creo que tiene algunos momentos dentro de su poesía realmente profundos, tiernos, muy líricos, soñador todo el tiempo, absolutamente soñador todo el tiempo. Pero la obra literaria de Martí que a mí me impresiona realmente es su obra periodística. Como articulista, era un tipo absolutamente brillante, de una lucidez, pero que en ningún momento descuidó el estilo cuidadosísimo de la prosa, de la riqueza del lenguaje.
I adore simplicity, but not that simplicity that comes from limiting my ideas to this or that, circle or school. Rather, I prefer the type of simplicity to say what I see, feel, or think, with the least number of words possible, using words that are powerful, graphic, energetic, and harmonious.
In 1881, separated from his son Pepito, Martí published a collection of poems titled Ismaelillo. The verses reflect Martí's yearning to be with his son. He opened the book with this note dedicated to the boy.
Son, appalled by everything, I take refuge in you. I have faith in the betterment of humanity, in a future life, in the usefulness of virtue, and in you.
Martí's relationship with his son was one of separation. His marriage to Carmen Zayas Bazan was a fractured marriage, and Carmen Zayas Bazan left him, and Martí dedicates this book to his son. It's a very tender book, but it's also, as some of the critics have pointed out, it's a book which heralds in a new way of writing. The poems deal with, strangely enough, though it's a book about his son and dedicated to his son, it deals with snatches of the hurried existence in New York, decadent society, or what Martí sees as the beginning of a decadent society in New York. And to portray all of that, he uses a metaphoric language with colors and images which had never been used in that way before.
Throughout the 1880s and into the 1890s, Martí reached the zenith of his literary career. He continued to work as a journalist and a poet while pursuing his love for the innocence of youth by printing a children's journal titled La Edad de Oro. Perhaps the most popular of Martí's literary works came in the early 1890s when he published his second collection of poems titled Versos Sencillos, or The Simple Verses. Intimate and rhythmic, the book captures the essence of Martí.
Cultivo una rosa blanca en julio como en enero para un amigo sincero que me da su mano franca y para el cruel que me arranca el corazón con que vivo. Cardo ni oruga cultivo una rosa blanca.
Emil Ludwig, the German writer, when he was writing about Cuba, and he read translation of Martí, and he said, if Martí would have been born in Munich, it would be a classic everywhere, but it's Cuba. And that is true too.
In 1884, Flor Crombet, a former Mambí, visited New York and explained to Martí that he could serve as a messenger to the generals Máximo Gómez and Antonio Maceo, who were both living in Central America at the time. Energized by the possibility to contact the legendary revolutionaries, Martí wrote Gómez a letter. In it he explained that although the climate was not apropos for an armed insurgents, work needed to be done, and that both Gómez and Maceo were needed for any effort to be successful. A few months later, Gómez and Maceo arrived in New York. After meeting with various revolutionary figures in the city, Gómez began assigning strategic tasks to key figures in the movement. Upon his menial assignment, Martí demanded further clarification, questioning the general's judgment. Máximo Gómez discarded the young Cuban's query and ordered him simply to obey orders without question. The next day, Martí wrote Gómez a letter stating, "A country is not founded, General, as a military camp is commanded."
When they got to New York, they had a difference of opinion with Martí, who believed that Cubans would not rise just because two generals arrived on the island and called for revolution, that the exiles had to provide a plan, provide a rationale and a vision for a future Cuba in order to successfully get people to lay down their lives for the country.
After the incident, Martí withdrew from revolutionary activities. In Cuba, the Spaniards abolished slavery in 1886 in hopes of deflating the separatist arguments. However, discontent grew against Cuban autonomists as they had failed to achieve representation within the Spanish Congress. News from Cuba was particularly grave for José Martí, as he received word that his father had passed away. By the late 1880s, with the election of Benjamin Harrison, annexation currents were once again bandying about Washington, D.C.
The U.S. begins to rise as the policy of manifest destiny. The United States suddenly sees the American continent as its backyard, and it wanted Spain out of the continent. So there was an island just 90 miles away Havana its capital. Havana was actually the capital for Spain. From Havana, Spain controlled all of the Americas. It was a city and a people to which Spain had contributed 400 years, establishing outstanding schools, creating basically a European capital that was Havana. And from this Cuban society, a society of doctors, lawyers, writers, Spain was basically able to control the Americas. For the United States, it had to be one of its primary goals to get Spain out of the continent and to bring Cuba into its fold. The United States aided the Cuban Mambises for decades, but it gave them enough aid to weaken Spain, but not enough aid for the Mambises to basically be able to defeat Spain by themselves.
On Thursday, March 21st, 1889, the New York Evening Post published an article titled "A Protectionist View of Cuban Annexation." In the piece, the New York paper cited an editorial which had recently been published in the Philadelphia Manufacturer. The paper lobbied against the annexation of Cuba, claiming that Cubans were helpless and unfitted by nature and experience for discharging the obligations of citizenship. The article triggered something in Martí, and 4 days later his response appeared on the pages of the New York Evening Post.
It is probable that no self-respecting Cuban would like to see this country annexed to a nation where the leaders of opinion share towards him prejudices excusable only to vulgar jingoism and/or rampant ignorance. These helpless men came here 20 years ago, empty-handed, with few exceptions, fought against the climate, mastered the language, and lived by their honest labor.
A strong desire for freedom still burned inside Martí, and in November of 1891, the spark for Cuban independence was once again lit as he was invited to speak to Cuban cigar workers in Ybor City, Tampa. Martí met with members of the Liceo Cubano, whose name was later changed to El Círculo Cubano, or the Cuban Circle.
Bueno, estaban reunidos los cubanos, citados por Martí, para una junta. Y en esa junta Martí vio que era un círculo de cubanos y él estaba en el medio hablándoles a todos. Y entonces dijo él, esto es lo que necesitaba yo, un círculo de cubanos para ayudarme para la revolución de Cuba. Y entonces el nombre sonó tan bien que cambiaron el Liceo Cubano para el Círculo Cubano de Tampa.
It was in Florida that the struggle for liberty in Cuba took a great stride forward. Martí began developing a broad revolutionary platform.
The Martí project now expands to include the participation of a fuller representation of the nation. There are now not only the middle class, not only the planter class, not only the representatives of the property owners, but now the vision of nation includes, as Martí says, las clases humildes. This is the poor of the dispossessed, the poor, are now incorporated into this notion of patria. It is a very important step because it now creates this notion of patria as a means of social mobility. I mean, the Martí project offers the promise of a better life, of social justice, of economic democracy, of political participation, of membership, of inclusion in the community and status. To a whole sector of the population that had previously been at least marginalized.
The support of the cigar workers of Florida was indispensable to Martí's push for freedom. Moved by Martí's actions and pronouncements, Paulina Pedroso and her husband Ruperto housed and fed Martí on many of his visits to Ybor City. Sensing the growing popularity of the Cuban revolutionary, the Spanish government moved to rid themselves of Martí, sponsoring several assassination attempts. After one failed attempt in Ybor City, it is said that Ruperto Pedroso would sleep at the doorstep of Martí's bedroom door. Since many of the cigar rollers were Afro-Cubans, Martí was challenging the divisive issue of race, which had been so heated during the time of the 10 Years' War.
Cuban means more than white, more than mulatto, more than negro. On the battlefields, the souls of whites and blacks who died together for Cuba have risen through the air.
Another one of Martí's fiercest supporters was Carolina Rodriguez, who had served as a messenger for the Mambí rebels during the 10 Years' War. Carolina, or La Patriota as she was referred to, accompanied Martí to various fundraising visits throughout the state and prompted the creation of women's political support groups known as Las Mambisas. In November of 1891, Martí drafted two key documents in Ybor City, the Tampa Resolutions and the basis of the Cuban Revolutionary Party. These documents would eventually serve as the foundation for the political assembly that would go on to orchestrate a new uprising in Cuba. During that same trip to Tampa, Martí delivered a speech that would become the mantra for the independence movement's egalitarianism. He concluded it by declaring,
"And let us place around the star of our new flag this formula for love triumphant. With all, and for the good of all."
In Key West, the editor of El Yara, Jose Dolores Pollo, had sent a stenographer to Tampa to record the speech in Tampa. And so he, when he came back with the speech, he published it in his newspaper El Yara. And apparently, this was probably read in the factories, and the workers were quite impressed with the message. And we don't know all the details of how this developed, but the lore tells us that a committee of workers got together, probably consulted with the veterans, the old veteran leaders of Key West, and asked that Martí be invited to come to Key West.
Seeking the support of the veterans of the 10 Years' War, Martí visited Key West.
Martí arrives in Key West on Christmas Eve, 1891, aboard the ship Oliveri. He was coming from Tampa. And there were hundreds at the dock in Key West greeting Martí. But he fell ill, and he was examined there at the dock by a physician who ordered him to have complete bed rest. So instead of going to the San Carlos Institute, where he was supposed to speak that night, he instead went to a friend's house on Duval Street, where he stayed for a few days while he recovered. He used that time to meet with the leaders of the Convención Cubana and with labor union leaders and with just civic leaders from Key West. And he got an idea from one and tried to incorporate it with the ideas of another person, and the same, trying to put the ideas of the Cuban community from Key West and tie those to the ideas of the Cuban community in Tampa and in New York and in Philadelphia. And it was that mastery of putting ideas together, making people feel that they were part of a process. And at the end of that week of recuperating in Key West, Martí finally arrived to the San Carlos on January 3rd, 1892, to a triumphal reception.
Martí goes and negotiates with them, talks to them, gives his speeches to the workers, and just as in Tampa, he's able to win over the workers quite rapidly, apparently. And comes to sort of a compromise with the veterans. The basic compromise that they come up with is that Máximo Gómez is going to be, they're agreed that Máximo Gómez would be named the military head of this new movement. And this was important for the veterans, and Martí accepted that idea.
On the heels of his successes in Florida, Martí founded El Partido Revolucionario Cubano, the Cuban Revolutionary Party. Conscious of not creating a stifling bureaucratic hierarchy, the PRC elected Martí as the delegate, a position he maintained until his death. One of the key figures Martí recruited for the party was the former president of the Republic in Arms, Tomás Estrada Palma.
Estrada Palma is a known annexationist. He is an American citizen. He has U.S. citizenship. He is white. He is a person of means. He's not poor by any stretch of the imagination. He's a Quaker. And so in many ways, the decision to appoint Martí, Estrada Palma as the delegate of the party is just baffling. And I'm not sure that anyone has developed a plausible explanation. One hears all the time, well, he's a senior statesman of the Cubans in exile. He was an ex-provisional president of the Republic during the 10 Years' War. He's this elder father figure that kind of looms over the polity of separatism. The problem is that it's a mistake. Insofar as one can look at the Martí program and follow Martí's thoughts, okay, is Estrada Palma the person to execute, to actualize a Martí project? Okay, and the answer is no.
In 1892, José Martí published Patria, a newspaper that served as the voice of the newly founded Revolutionary Party.
The world is divided into two camps. One is filled with those who hate freedom because they want it only for themselves. The other is filled with those who love freedom and want it for everyone.
With the backing of a solid political foundation in the PRC, Martí regained the support of Generals Gómez and Maceo. Though leery of their beliefs in democratic principle, Martí felt the battle could not be waged without them. In January of 1895, the first attempt to strike against the Spanish imperialists was foiled, but not by the Spaniards. 3 ships carrying guns and headed for Cuba were boarded and seized on the docks of Fernandina, Florida, by U.S. authorities who feared breaking any international neutrality acts. Though the mission was a failure, in the minds of Cuban revolutionaries, it cemented Martí's image as a man who was committed to paying any price for the cause of Cuba's independence. By February 1895, Martí had joined Máximo Gómez in the town of Montecristi, on the northwest coast of the Dominican Republic. There they drafted and signed the Manifesto of Montecristi, a document which sealed their antagonism against the Spanish Empire. It was from Montecristi that Martí and Gómez would embark for Cuba, where they would join the armed revolt. On April 11, 1895, Martí and Gómez reached the shores of Cuba. Martí was euphoric to be in Cuba at last, fighting for what he had dreamed of his entire life.
There's a process in the production of what they call the last diaries, or the Diario de Campaña, when Martí returns in 95 to Cuba. And the process involves a series of notebooks called Cuadernos de Apuntes, or notebooks, in which Martí, who was a voracious reader, made notes on everything that he read and commented on them. In addition, he wrote small pieces in these notebooks about works which he hoped to write, or actual pieces of works that he intended to develop. So there's a certain dialogue with himself and the cultivation of an intimate discourse, which is preparatory to the last diaries, or which have now been unified as Diarios de Campaña in the plural. And those are quite different from his other works. The metaphoric style, which is characteristic of Martí, is present, but the style is almost telegraphic, but very lyrical. It recounts the approach of the boat which took him and the others to Playitas, the entrance into the Manigua, the forests of Cuba, and the marches that they made in preparation for the revolutionary struggle against the Spanish army.
Not even a month after disembarking on Cuban shores, Gómez and Martí met up with Antonio Maceo's regiment at a sugar refinery named La Mejorana. The meeting was tense, and Maceo showed great disdain for Martí, fearing that the poet's talk of representative civilian government was more of the same rhetoric he had heard during the 10 Years' War. After the conflict, Martí understood his great plan had reached a tremendous obstacle.
If you read his diary, you'll see how the first notes were full of enthusiasm and love for the land, to be free, to be called Capitán Araña, no? But basically hinted that he had not fought, that he was a coward. Now he was in Cuba. Now he was hailing everything. But as he moved and began to encounter some of the leaders of the war, he began to see that there were envy and problems. He knew that. He answered the question, what will happen if you go to Cuba? And said, they are going to kill me. The Spaniards, no, the Cubans. But he realized that, and he go to La Mejorana to meet Máximo Gómez and Maceo. Maceo was very, very hard, apparently, with him. And he said that we are going to have a gathering for the Constitution that cannot be controlled by our abogadito here, our little lawyer here. I think Martí committed suicide when he saw that his ideas were in the hands of Máximo Gómez and Antonio Maceo.
And what we have then is a civilian who has no battle experience, no field command, no military experience, preparing for a war that some people thought was not well conceived, not well timed, and so we have a war that is launched, and Martí mistakenly believes that it's going to be a fast war. The Grito de Baile of 1895 then creates a moment where the insurrections that pop up are short-lived, and the only place that it takes hold is eastern Cuba. And the short war that Martí had envisioned now becomes a long war, a terribly destructive war.
Yo creo que él no pudo exactamente, que él no pudo más, que él no pudo con todo aquello que se había formado, con las luchas intestinas, como todo el que forma una revolución está creando también monstruos. Como decía Goya, el sueño de la razón, ¿no? Crea monstruos. Pues los monstruos van creciendo, los monstruos te van devorando, y lo que en un momento determinado comenzaste como la mejor y la más bella de las posibilidades, pues termina degenerando, y ante eso, ¿qué puedes hacer? ¿Qué puedes hacer? ¿En qué momento murió el proyecto revolucionario martiano?
On March 15, 1895, Martí penned a letter to his mother.
Today, on the eve of a long journey, I am thinking of you. I think of you ceaselessly. In the wrath of your love, you are pained by the sacrifice of my life. But then why was I born from you with a life that loves sacrifice? I have good reason to set off more contented and certain than you can imagine. Truth and tenderness are not useless. Do not suffer.
On May 19, 1895, José Martí disobeyed the orders of General Máximo Gómez and rode out into a skirmish near the camp. There, between two rivers, the fate of Cuban independence was forever marked. José Martí fell to his poetic death.
Todo muy poético, ¿me entiendes? En un traje, con una pistolita ridiculísima, en un caballo súper deslumbrante, vestido todo de negro, a plena luz del día. Es que es muy poético, ¿me entiendes? Es demasiado poético como para creer que fuera accidental. Yo, en última instancia, dejándole, no creo que haya sido un suicida, pero sí creo que como hombre profundamente ético y convencido de la imposibilidad, hastiado, hasta cierto punto, pues se lanzó y dijo, bueno, esto es lo que me están pidiendo a gritos, ¿no? Yo creo que la inteligencia de los políticos o de los héroes o de los pretendidos mitos está en morir temprano. El único mito que no se decodifica nunca es el que muere joven. Y yo, claro que esto no habrá nunca cómo demostrarlo, ni no es más que una especulación como cualquier otra que se haga en ese sentido. Lo he comprendido muchísimas veces, lo he comprendido y lo he sentido en carne propia muchísimas veces, ante la imposibilidad de que realmente lo que tú crees que es una verdadera causa ética. Creo que Martí fue un hombre muy ético y que aplicaba la ética como estética de la conducta.
No me pongas en lo oscuro, a morir como un traidor. Yo soy bueno y como bueno moriré de cara al sol. Yo quiero cuando me muera, sin patria pero sin amo, tener en mi losa un ramo de flores y una bandera. José Martí.